In a land built on the backs of enslaved men and women, where dreams were forbidden and hope was a dangerous thing to possess, a few souls dared to defy destiny. They were not born into privilege, they were born into chains. Yet they looked at the same fields, the same cities, the same cruel horizon, and saw not despair, but opportunity. Their hands, once bound in iron, would later hold deeds to land, keys to businesses, and the signatures of empires they built themselves. They would rise from the lowest rung of American life to become the first African Americans to own true wealth, to control their futures, to touch the sky that once denied them light. This is their story, the story of faith, fire, and fortune. This is Black Fortunes, the story of the first 6 African Americans who escaped slavery and became millionaires. Chapter 1. The Price of Freedom. The year was 1865, a year that would forever echo in the soul of America. The Civil War had ended, and with its final breath came a promise, a fragile, trembling promise, that nearly 4 million enslaved African Americans were now free. But this freedom did not come wrapped in celebration or comfort. It came in silence, confusion, and pain. The plantations were quiet now. The whips no longer cracked, but the memories of them still burned deep in the skin and the spirit. Men and women who had known nothing but labor and chains stood staring into the horizon, wondering what freedom truly meant. Where could they go? What could they do? There were no maps to guide them, no land to call their own, no coins in their pockets, and no mercy from a society that had once sold them like property. Imagine stepping out of bondage after generations of servitude, stepping into a world that looked at you and still saw you as less than human. Every road forward was lined with fear. White mobs waited in anger, laws were twisted to deny their progress, and hunger haunted every step. For so many, the word freedom felt like a cruel joke whispered by history. And yet, within that darkness, a few refused to surrender. From the ashes of slavery, sparks began to rise, small, flickering lights that would one day become flames of brilliance. There were men and women who looked at their calloused hands and said, "These same hands that once picked cotton will now build empires." They refused to be erased, refused to be silent, refused to be defined by chains that were no longer on their bodies, but still clung to the minds of others. They built businesses from dust, acquired land when the world tried to deny them a single inch of soil, and educated their children even when reading a book could once cost them their lives. Every coin they earned, every brick they laid, every lesson they taught their children was an act of rebellion. Their journeys were not just about wealth. They were about something much greater, about proving to history itself that intelligence, ambition, and greatness were never defined by skin, but by spirit. They stood as living proof that freedom, once seized, must never shrink. It must grow, expand, and transform into something powerful enough to lift an entire people. These were not just survivors of slavery. They were the architects of possibility, the first to dream, to fight, and to build a future that their ancestors had prayed for in chains. And through their courage, the world would soon learn a truth that could never again be buried, that greatness has no color, and destiny belongs to the brave. Chapter 2. Mary Ellen Pleasant, the mother of civil rights. In the early 1800s, a young girl named Mary Ellen Pleasant was born into slavery. Her birth was marked by silence. No record of her exact date, no family history to preserve her name. But behind her quiet eyes burned a relentless fire, a mind sharper than any chain could hold. Mary's early years were spent in servitude, but fate placed her in the hands of a family in Massachusetts who secretly supported the abolitionist movement. There, she was taught something rare for a black girl at the time. She was taught to read, and with every word she learned, her world grew larger. While most girls her age were dreaming of survival, Mary was studying people, their habits, their weaknesses, their greed. She watched, listened, and learned from the wealthy white families she served. By the time she reached adulthood, she understood something powerful. Money was freedom's sharpest weapon. When the gold rush began, Mary Ellen Pleasant moved to San Francisco, a city filled with chaos, ambition, and greed. There she reinvented herself completely. She opened laundries, boarding houses, and invested in restaurants. She listened to whispers of business deals and used them to her advantage. She made alliances quietly, operated under aliases, and accumulated wealth in ways that few could trace. But her heart remained loyal to one cause: freedom for her people. She became a secret financier of the Underground Railroad and quietly funded abolitionist movements. It was said that she even supported John Brown's rebellion at Harper's Ferry, a daring plan to strike at the heart of slavery. When questioned later about her involvement, she did not deny it. She simply said, "I helped him because he was right." Her money spoke louder than speeches. Her actions spoke louder than laws. Later in life, when California's segregation laws tried to deny black citizens access to public spaces, Mary fought back, taking her case to court and winning. She became known as the mother of civil rights in California. But success brought envy. Whispers of scandal followed her, her name dragged through mud by those who could not bear a powerful black woman's rise. Yet, when Mary Ellen Pleasant died in 1904, she left behind an estate worth millions and a legend too powerful to erase. Her gravestone bears one simple line: "She was a friend of John Brown." But to history, she was far more than that. She was a warrior who understood that money could build more than houses. It could build liberation itself. Chapter 3. Robert Reed Church, the banker of Beale Street. In the heart of Memphis, Tennessee, where the Mississippi River rolled thick with the echoes of slavery and war, a man named Robert Reed Church began to carve his destiny. Born in 1839, Robert's life began on a steamboat, the child of an enslaved woman and a white riverboat owner. His childhood was marked by contrasts: privilege on one side, oppression on the other. When the Civil War broke out, Robert saw firsthand the destruction that came with it. But when the smoke cleared, he saw something else: opportunity. While others fled the burning streets of Memphis during the race riots, Robert stayed. He began buying land, charred, abandoned, and worthless in the eyes of others. He rebuilt those spaces, brick by brick, and slowly, quietly, he became one of the largest landowners in Memphis. He opened hotels, saloons, and even built the Grand Church's Auditorium, the first major cultural center for African Americans in the city. There, black musicians, thinkers, and politicians gathered, their voices echoing in a space built by a man who was once enslaved. But Robert Reed Church's true legacy was still to come. In 1906, when most banks refused to lend to African Americans, he founded the Solvent Savings Bank and Trust Company, one of the first black-owned banks in the nation. Through it, he gave thousands of freedmen and women access to home loans and business capital, something almost unthinkable at the time. He believed that ownership was the foundation of dignity. His bank didn't just hold money, it held dreams. Families built homes, entrepreneurs opened shops, students went to college, all because of the doors Robert opened. But Robert's journey was not without pain. He faced racial violence, threats, and attempts to destroy his empire. White mobs tried to burn his properties. Newspapers attacked his reputation, yet he never stopped building. When he died in 1912, he left behind a thriving financial institution and a city forever changed. His son, Robert Church Jr., would later become one of the leading voices in civil rights. In a world determined to keep him poor and powerless, Robert Reed Church used his mind, his money, and his will to show that freedom without finance is only half a dream. Chapter 4. Annie Turnbo Malone, the hair care pioneer. In the aftermath of slavery, beauty for black women was not just about appearance. It was about identity, pride, and power. In a world that constantly told them they were less than beautiful, one woman decided to rewrite that truth. Her name was Turnbo Malone, a woman whose vision would create an empire and empower millions. Annie was born in 1869, the daughter of parents who had once been enslaved. She grew up in poverty, often ill and unable to finish her schooling, but what she lacked in wealth, she made up for in curiosity. Annie had a natural love for science, especially chemistry, and she began experimenting with oils and herbs in her small room, determined to find a formula that could nourish and grow black hair. In those times, most hair products available were made for white women and often damaged black hair. But Annie's mixture, made with care, patience, and precision, worked wonders. Her friends tried it, then their friends did, and soon word began to spread. Annie Turnbo has magic in her hands. She named her brand Poro, a word symbolizing purity and spiritual growth. But Annie's dream was bigger than selling products. She wanted to create a movement. She trained young women, teaching them not only how to style hair, but how to build businesses of their own. Her sales agents, dressed in crisp uniforms and carrying themselves with dignity, traveled door to door across the country. They weren't just selling hair oil, they were selling confidence, independence, and hope. By the early 1900s, Annie had become one of the wealthiest black women in America. She built the magnificent Poro College in St. Louis, a training center that combined education, employment, and empowerment. It wasn't just a factory, it was a palace of dreams, where young women learned to believe in themselves. But with fame came betrayal. One of her protégés, Sarah Breedlove, later known as Madam C.J. Walker, would take Annie's ideas and build her own empire. Their relationship would turn bitter with time, but Annie never let jealousy destroy her grace. She continued her mission, giving to charities, funding orphanages, and providing scholarships for black students. In a world that told her she could be nothing more than a maid, Annie Turnbo Malone built a fortune from faith, chemistry, and courage. Her legacy was not measured only in money, but in the millions of women she inspired to lift their heads high and see beauty in their reflection. Chapter 5. Madam C.J. Walker, the first self-made female millionaire. If Annie Turnbo laid the foundation for beauty and empowerment, then Madam C.J. Walker turned it into an unstoppable revolution. Born in 1867 as Sarah Breedlove, she was the daughter of enslaved parents and the first in her family to be born free. But freedom for her was cruel and heavy. By the age of 7, she was an orphan. By 14, she was married. By 20, she was a widow, a single mother washing clothes for pennies a day. Her hands were rough, her body tired, and her spirit nearly broken. But inside her, there was a spark that refused to die. In her early 30s, Sarah began suffering from severe hair loss, a problem common among black women at the time due to poor scalp health and harsh products. Desperate, she began experimenting with homemade remedies. That's when she crossed paths with Annie Turnbo Malone, who became her mentor and introduced her to the world of hair care sales. Sarah watched, learned, and dreamed of one day creating her own line. In 1905, she did. She called it Madam C.J. Walker's Wonderful Hair Grower, using the name of her second husband, Charles Joseph Walker, to give her brand a sense of elegance and respectability. She traveled from city to city, knocking on doors, demonstrating her products in churches, and speaking to women who had been told all their lives that they were unworthy. Her message was simple, yet revolutionary. Don't sit down and wait for the opportunities to come. Get up and make them. Her passion was magnetic. Women saw in her not just a salesperson, but a symbol of transformation. Soon, Madam Walker's empire grew beyond imagination. She opened factories, schools, and training programs across America and the Caribbean. Thousands of black women became Walker agents, earning good money and dignity for the first time in their lives. By the time she was 42, Madam C.J. Walker was officially recognized as America's first self-made female millionaire, not just black female, but female, period. She bought a grand mansion in New York, a home so magnificent that even the Rockefellers lived nearby. But despite her luxury, she never forgot where she came from. She donated generously to churches, schools, and civil rights movements. She funded scholarships and supported the NAACP in their fight against lynching. When she died in 1919, her final words to her daughter were, "I want to make the world better for women." And she did. Madam C.J. Walker's legacy still echoes through every entrepreneur who rises from nothing and dares to believe that greatness can come from pain. Chapter 6. O.W. Gurley, the founder of Black Wall Street. In the early 1900s, the Deep South was still haunted by hatred. Jim Crow laws ruled, lynchings were common, and opportunity for black Americans was scarce. Yet amid that darkness, one man envisioned something extraordinary, a city built by and for black people, a city of wealth, pride, and unity. That man was Ottawa W. Gurley. Born to formerly enslaved parents, O.W. Gurley grew up with an unshakable faith in education and business. He became a teacher, a postal worker, and later a businessman. But his true dream began when he arrived in Tulsa, Oklahoma. In 1906, Gurley purchased 40 acres of land, but he made one bold rule. He would only sell it to other black families. And so, from the dust of discrimination, a new world began to rise. The Greenwood District, later known to history as Black Wall Street. Within a few short years, Greenwood became a miracle of prosperity. There were black-owned banks, hotels, restaurants, theaters, and schools. Doctors, lawyers, barbers, teachers, all living, working, and thriving together. At night, the streets glowed with electric lights and the hum of jazz. It was a vision of what America could be. Equality not through charity, but through enterprise. But that dream would be tested in fire. In 1921, a white mob, fueled by lies and hate, descended upon Greenwood. For 18 hours, they looted, burned, and destroyed everything Gurley had built. More than 1,200 homes and businesses were reduced to ashes. Hundreds were killed. The sky itself turned black with smoke. And just like that, one of the most successful black communities in American history was gone. Gurley's wealth vanished, his buildings burned, but his spirit never did. He quietly left Tulsa, his dream buried in ashes, but his message lived on. He had shown the world that with unity and enterprise, a community could rise higher than hate could ever reach. Chapter 7. Jeremiah Hamilton, the Wall Street Rebel. Before Madam C.J. Walker built her empire, before O.W. Gurley dreamed of Black Wall Street, before Robert Church rose from the ashes of Memphis, there was a man history almost erased, a man too bold for his time, too powerful for the society that surrounded him. His name was Jeremiah G. Hamilton, and he would become known as America's first black millionaire of Wall Street. Born around 1806, Jeremiah's story began in mystery, as if destiny itself had written him into the shadows and light of history. No one knew exactly where he came from. Some said Haiti, others whispered about the Caribbean. But what everyone knew was this: when Jeremiah arrived in New York City as a young man, he carried with him no title, no wealth, no protection, only a mind sharper than the blades of those who sought to cut him down. It was an age when the air in America still reeked of slavery, when the color of one's skin determined not only one's rights, but one's worth. Yet Jeremiah walked straight into the heart of the world's most ruthless arena, Wall Street, a place where even white men were crushed by greed and ambition, and somehow he thrived. They called him the Prince of Darkness. But it wasn't evil they feared, it was brilliance. A black man daring to outthink white bankers, outplay their games, and outperform their empires. His very success was a rebellion, an act of war against a system that said men like him were meant to serve, not succeed. Jeremiah was ruthless in business, cold, calculating, and impossibly confident. He saw opportunity where others saw risk. He bought insurance companies, invested in merchant ships, and moved through the volatile world of real estate speculation with the swagger of a man who refused to bow. When markets crashed, he bought what others sold. When rivals schemed, he smiled and struck harder. By the 1850s, his fortune had soared to over $2 million, a staggering sum equal to more than $50 million today. Imagine that, a black man, barely a generation out of bondage's shadow, commanding the kind of wealth that even white elites whispered about with envy. He lived like a king. His homes were grand, his lifestyle extravagant, his clothes the finest money could buy. He mingled with the wealthy of New York, not as a servant or an entertainer, but as an equal, or worse, as a threat. He even did what few dared. He sued white businessmen in court, and won. Each victory was not just legal, it was symbolic. It told an entire nation that intellect knows no color, and that courage could overturn the very rules of the game. But power always comes with a price. When Jeremiah died in 1875, the same newspapers that celebrated white tycoons mocked him. They called him arrogant, corrupt, ungrateful. They tried to bury his name under ridicule, hoping time would erase the audacity of his existence. Yet, history has a way of remembering the truth. Jeremiah G. Hamilton was not corrupt. He was unapologetically brilliant. He had walked into a world designed to destroy him, mastered its language, and beaten it at its own game. He was not the Prince of Darkness. He was the Prince of Defiance. A man who, against every chain, every insult, and every law that told him, "You can't," rose to whisper back to history, "Watch me." Chapter 8. The Legacy of the First Black Millionaires. They began as slaves. They became survivors. And then, they became legends. Mary Ellen Pleasant, the silent financier who turned her wealth into a weapon for justice. Robert Reed Church, who built banks when others built barriers. Annie Turnbo Malone, who gave women beauty and pride. Madam C.J. Walker, who turned her pain into a global empire. O.W. Gurley, who built a city from faith. Jeremiah Hamilton, who stormed Wall Street with brilliance and defiance. They were more than millionaires. They were architects of possibility. Each of them carried the same unbreakable truth, that freedom is not simply the absence of chains, but the presence of opportunity. Today, their stories whisper to every dreamer, every struggler, every soul who has ever been told you can't, because they did. Their fortunes were not just in dollars, but in courage. Their wealth was not only in property, but in pride. They didn't just buy freedom for themselves, they carved a path for generations to walk upon. This has been Black Fortunes, the story of the first 6 African Americans who escaped slavery and became millionaires. May their stories remind us that true greatness is born not from comfort, but from the courage to rise above it.